to the September 2022 edition of Hunt Camp Mail. Well, I survived my trip to Africa and was miraculously able to throw together a video for you before the end of the month. I really burned the midnight oil putting that video together for you, making sure it was within YouTube's monetization guidelines, and it wasn't going to get erased or shadow banned. My viewers know that I really don't do a lot of hunting videos. They're a lot of work. They get very few reviews. Even that Africa one I just didn't get very many reviews. And they tend to get me in trouble with YouTube. So I kind of been shying away from a lot of hunting videos the last couple years. As you know, my hunts are not about animals or horn measurements. My hunts are more about the hunt itself, the experience of the hunt. And in that regard, my recent trip to Zimbabwe just exceeded my expectations. That hunt was literally one of the greatest experiences of my life from a hunting perspective. It was the only time I've ever really felt a sense of fulfillment from an Africa hunt, to be honest with you. And, I had to earn everything. The animals, my relationships with people, getting there, leaving there, everything had to be earned, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. After I posted that video of that Zambezi Valley hunting and fishing trip, my email was just flooded with letters pertaining to that hunt. Because of this, I'll address those questions in a separate Africa Q&A video that I'll try to produce for you next month. But if you ask me a question about Africa hunting this month, I'm going to defer it over to that video, just so you know that. I received a lot of questions about the cost of my hunt. More questions about CMS safaris, many gear questions, and dozens of other questions about everything from shoes to souvenirs. So expect an Africa-specific Q&A video next month. Well, after I got back, Beck and I were able to do a little bit of dove hunting before the opening season closed on us, which I'm glad we did. We made it a group affair and ended up going out with a bunch of friends, which was really fun. And then after the hunt, we had a dove taco beer and pool party at the Desert Dog residence. And here's a little bit of that action. So before I start rambling on too long like I usually do, let's get to September's mail. Our first letter is from Stephen in Maine. Stephen wrote, "Like you, I love shark fishing. Also like you, I use circle hooks and release all of my sharks unharmed. It's good to see a like-minded angler that believes in conserving these important apex predators of the ocean. My question is about steel leaders. How do you attach your steel leaders to hardware, and do you use single or 7-strand wire?" Well, that's a good opening letter, Stephen, and I definitely love shark fishing. It's like the dangerous game hunting of the ocean. It's a good way. It's a good way to look at it. I might keep the occasional thresher shark to eat, but the rest of them always get released unharmed, especially the big females of any species. My wire bite leader depends on what I'm after usually. If I'm fishing for smaller sharks on the flats or, across shallow reefs or something like that, I'll use single strand American fishing wire attached to hardware with a haywire twist. If I'm hunting bigger sharks, I always use multi-strand wire and attach my hardware with crimps. So it depends on the size of the fish that I'm targeting. And our next question is from David in Colorado. David wrote, "The 300 Winchester Short Magnum piques my interest. but I'd like objective input on the cartridge before committing to it. I know you're not a fan of the 300 Winchester Magnum, but do you hold the same view towards the 300 Winchester Short Magnum? Well, no, I don't, David. The 300 Win Mag is one of the most inefficient cartridges made, in my opinion. And the SAMI specs for it suck, and you're constantly running out of magazine space before you get anywhere near that overall length that you're wanting. The 300 Winchester Short Magnum, on the other hand, does the same thing as the Win Mag, but with much less powder, noticeably less recoil, and it handles shorter barrels better because of that. The 300 Winchester Short Magnum takes almost the same powder charge for the same velocity as the venerable old 300 H&H Magnum, which is about perfect for a 300 Magnum. So I think the 300 Winchester Short Magnum is superior to the 300 Win Mag. I hope that answered your question. Next, we have a letter from Paul in the UK. Paul wrote, I just watched the movie Memory and would like your comments on the following. The 38 caliber bullet has marks from a suppressor. My quote may be a bit off, but close enough. Can bullets carry marks of a suppressor, or is this Hollywood bullshit? I feel that you may need to use your special red button for this one. Well, Paul, for some homemade or improvised suppressors or old units with the wipers inside of them, trace amounts of plastic or rubber or metal might be left on the bullet. It's highly improbable, but it might carry trace amounts of that. And maybe that could be used as evidence. But modern commercially made suppressors would leave no evidence that a bullet was fired from a suppressed firearm. That's definitely Hollywood bullshit. Bullshit! 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 A properly manufactured and installed suppressor would have absolutely no physical contact with the bullet, so it would leave no trace or no evidence. Also be mindful that in the real world, forensic bullet analysis is somewhat of a pseudoscience. It might tell you what type of gun fired the bullet. For instance, it came out of a Glock 22 or a Glock 19, but it really doesn't match to an exact barrel all the time like Hollywood movies would have you believe. The suppressor matching suppressors with bullets, it is complete bullshit. And our next question is from Rich from Bakersfield, California. I was going to serenade you with Buck Owens' Streets of Bakersfield, but I'll spare you from that. Rich wrote, just checking to see if you've had a chance to pattern your Boss 20 gauge shells and curious to hear or see your results as to what choke and pattern combination you'll use. This will be my first season shooting number 7 Boss shells, and I was curious to get another perspective. I'll be shooting a Browning 12 gauge with a Jeb's 690 choke, which has patterned very well for me from 30 to 40 yards. Unfortunately, Rich, so far, I haven't been disappointed or overly impressed with the Boss shells at this time anyway. They don't seem to pattern any better than the Kent Bismuth shells I was using sometimes before. I also wasn't overly impressed with their performance over steel on Doves. I guess they were hyped up so much by everybody on the internet that my expectations were probably a bit too high, maybe. I think they're a good quality shell, but they definitely don't come anywhere near the performance of the good old lead shells we used to use. I'll continue to use them throughout quail and pheasant season and report back later with some better findings, I think. And our next question is from Hagen from Germany. Last month he was Hagen from Mexico, and today he's Hagen from Germany again. I'm glad you're German again, but you're going to really miss that Mexican food, Hagen. Hagen wrote me a long story about some of the poor safety practices he witnesses from shooters at a shooting range in Germany. Hagen then asked, what is the scariest thing you have ever seen or experienced on the range? Boy, there's so many of them. As a certified NRA instructor and someone who spent a lot of time at gun clubs and ranges, I've pretty much seen it all. I've seen rifles explode while people were shooting them on the bench, and pistols self-destruct in people's hands. I've seen negligent discharges, malfunctioning firearms, drunks with guns, psychotic people, uninformed people, and the most dangerous of all, stupid people. Probably the worst person at a range I've ever seen was ironically an active duty police officer from Southern California. He attended a tactical rifle class that I was also participating in, and that guy had 3 negligent discharge in that class. One was from his AR-15, I believe, and he had 2 separate negligent discharge incidents while he was transitioning to pistol in that class. The bullet from his last negligent discharge actually shot off the very tip of his boot. I mean, that guy got lucky. In addition to this, he showed up to class with his aim point mounted backwards on his AR-15. That's right. His aim point was mounted backwards. And it seemed like during that entire first day of class, the instructor was constantly telling him to keep his finger off the damn trigger. Amazingly, and against the wishes of everybody in that class, the school shooting school allowed him to continue, which made no sense. But on the second day, he didn't show up to class, and we later found out that that guy had a negligent discharge in his hotel room while he was cleaning his gun that night. Because he was a police officer who, supposedly handles firearms regularly, or at least daily, I count him as the biggest bonehead I've ever seen at a shooting range. I'm sorry, but if you're military or police, my expectations for safety and conduct while you handle a firearm are very high. And that was a good question, Hagen. And our next letter is from Steve from Arkansas. Steve wrote, I used CLP on my boat paddle M77 as you suggested, and it did freshen up the stock. I'm glad that worked out for you. Starting at the pistol grip, I tightened screws in steps, ultimately taking the rear trigger guard screw to 25, the front to 30, and the recoil lug bolt to 50 inch-pounds. I put blue Loctite on the threads. My question is, what torque values should I apply to reassembly? And should I free float the barrel and bed the recoil lug? Well, Steve, I always free float my barrels and bed the recoil lug. I mean, doing that is the first fundamental step to achieving maximum rifle precision. I mean, that's always a good step no matter what rifle it is. On torque values, I thought I covered that in my Ruger M77 video, but the front action screw for the recoil lug needs to be very tight. Ruger recommends 90 to 95 inch-pounds on that screw. That's a lot, but that's what it takes to make them accurate. The rear screw should be about 40 to 50 inch-pounds, and that middle screw should be just nice and snug. Do not torque down that middle screw at all. If you put anything above about, 10, maybe 15 inch-pounds of torque on that middle bolt, accuracy will probably diminish on you due to torque flex in that receiver. And you might have floor plate issues also if you torque that bolt too much. So just snug down that middle screw. That's probably the major mistake you're making there. And also, don't use Loctite, oil, or anything else on your action screws. Never. This will give you different torque values than you think you're getting. And, it makes disassembly a pain in the ass too. And our next question is from Trevon from South Carolina. Trevon asked, "This is my first year hunting doves, and I shot a few Eurasian collared doves along with a limit of mourning doves. Do Eurasian collared doves taste different than mourning doves?" It's a great question. That's the first time anybody's ever asked me that too. I actually think they do taste different, to tell you the truth, Trevon, but not drastically different. And if you season your doves or you use your dove meat to make jalapeno poppers or something like that, you definitely won't be able to tell the difference. It's ironic that collared doves look and behave exactly like a cross between a pigeon and a dove because their flavor is also somewhere between the two. So taste-wise, collared doves are a little bit gamier than mourning doves. But if that bothers you, just brine the breast in salt water before you cook them, and that hint of gaminess will completely disappear. And I happily eat all doves. And our next question is from Larry from Oildale, California. Larry wrote, "Hello, Desert Dog. I really enjoy your videos. Tons of information, and the memes at the end put a smile on my face. I do a little fishing now and then, mostly bass fishing, but recently got into deep sea fishing. Last year, I was able to get my daughters to go with me, and they enjoyed it so much that we've gone multiple times. The girls and I really enjoy going deep sea fishing. With that being said, maybe we can get together sometime and go deep sea fishing." Well, thank you for the letter, Larry. And Larry sent me a picture of his daughter out fishing. That's a really nice red she got there, Larry. Man, those fish are delicious. I do need to load up the freezer with some meat for fish tacos, so some kind of fan favorite fishing trip to load up on Rockcod might be in our future. I'll contact you with details, Larry. And our next question is from Tex. Tex didn't say where he's from. I'm assuming Texas if your name is Tex. Tex asked, "I did not expect Varget to be the correct powder for a cartridge the size of .416 Remington Magnum. Very interesting." Well, Tex, too many people believe that powder burn rates are based on case capacity alone. But that's not exactly true. Powder burn rates, in addition to case capacity, are actually also based on case volume to bore area ratio. And also, don't forget, it's based on bullet weight. So that's what determines powder selection. So yes, the .416 Remington Magnum does take a large powder charge, but it also has a large bore diameter, so it does well with medium burn rate powders. Usually, the more over-bore a cartridge is, the more it needs slower powders. So case volume to bore area ratio is why 223 and 308 use almost the exact same powders, and why 25-06 and 30-06 favor different powders, even though they have nearly the same case volume. So just because someone calls a cartridge a Magnum doesn't mean it needs slow burning powders. And our next question is from Argo from Los Angeles. Argo wrote, "I had the privilege of hunting in Europe and all over the United States. Hunters all over the world seem to categorize doves and pigeons as different birds. Admittedly, the differences do seem obvious. But I was talking to my niece, who just graduated with a degree in biology, about dove hunting, and she claims that doves and pigeons are the exact same thing. She said this is a scientific fact, and the only difference is what people call them. What are your thoughts on this? See if I can answer this without ruffling any feathers or insulting your niece. Many biologists will tell you that doves and pigeons are exactly the same, and that the only difference between the two is the language we use to describe them. But I disagree, and I think hunters know better too. European rock pigeons and even our band-tailed pigeons that are indigenous to my area have drastically different behavior, flying ability, diet, profile, and different flavor than all of our dove subspecies do. I mean, sure, I think we can all agree that they're the same family of birds, but to hunters, the differences between doves and pigeons are drastic and obvious, which is why we don't consider them to be the same. A good analogy would be the salmon versus the rainbow trout. You know, they're the same family of fish with drastically different lifestyles, behaviors, diets, and even flavor when you eat them, which is why fishermen don't call a rainbow trout a salmon. You know, what you're experiencing is the difference between someone who was freshly book educated in a university versus someone who spent their life actually observing, patterning, hunting, and eating these birds. You know, we know pigeons and doves are in the same family of birds and have similarities like feeding their young crop milk. But as hunters, we know the differences between doves and pigeons are drastic enough that they have to be hunted differently and they taste different. You know, we can easily distinguish between the two visually, even when they're flying out 200 yards in the distance. So a biology instructor at UCLA might consider doves and pigeons to be the same exact thing, but hunters know the differences between doves and pigeons are drastic enough to refer to them separately. So that's what we do. And our next question is from Gregory from New York, New York. Gregory wrote, I grew up fishing and duck hunting, but just now rediscovered it in my late 50s. I started watching your old videos up to your current Africa video. Belize, Mexico, Africa, Alaska, Australia, and everywhere in between. I've always dreamed of visiting such places as you do, but held off. For the last several months, I've been living through your experiences and would love to experience some of it myself now. Well, good for you, Gregory, but do it now. Do it now, Gregory. Don't wait another year. You probably spent your whole life using children, finances, work, and your health as an excuse not to travel. I mean, everybody does it. You know, that's what most people do. You know, they go through life making excuses for never doing what they want to do. This is because people are either procrastinators or they're too lazy to plan something, or, you know, they're so undisciplined with their finances that they're incapable of saving money to take a trip. Even when I was a poor construction worker, basically living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment, I'd save up enough gas money to drive through Mexico, you know, camping and fishing on every remote beach I could find on the map. You know, my youngest son lives just above the poverty line, and he still found a way to save enough money to travel through Europe this summer. You know, I used to know a guy that worked as a cashier at Costco, and he'd go on hunting trips to Africa and South America. So stop making excuses and plan your trip ASAP. Every day you wake up is both a blessing and a curse. Trust me on that. It's a blessing because, well, you're still alive, but It's a curse because you're one day closer to the end, and your window of opportunity for achieving your dreams just got slimmer. So before you know it, it'll be too late. If you don't do it now, Gregory, in my opinion, you probably never will. And our next question is from Chris. Chris didn't say where he was from. Obviously, he doesn't watch a lot of Hunt Camp Mail. Hopefully we change that. But Chris wrote, I just watched your videos on powders for the 30-06 and was wondering if you have an opinion on Ramshot Hunter powder. I know you said you don't like ball powders, but it's the first powder I was able to buy in a long time. I was hoping to use it for 308 Win, 30-06, and 6.5-06 mostly. Well, Chris, yeah, you're correct. I'd rather not use a ball powder if I have a choice, but it sounds like you don't have a choice, and we've all been in that situation. I've used Ramshot before, and it meters great in progressive presses, I think. It's also, a decently versatile powder. The drawback is that it's not very temperature stable at all, so I hope you don't live or hunt in a place where it gets really hot. They say it's like the 4350 powders, but I think its burn rate is actually closer to the 4831 powders. So I consider it a substitute for 4831, if I used it. It might be a little bit too slow of a powder for your 308 loads, but it's probably a damn good powder for those 180 grain or 200 grain loads for your 30-06. And our next question is from Tony from Oklahoma. Tony wrote, I started watching your videos a few months ago, and I noticed you use the words free range and fair chase a lot. I understand that a hunt should be fair chase. Otherwise, it's not really ethical hunting. In your recent Africa videos, you also use the term free range. If a high fence property is so big that it's enough to be called fair chase, wouldn't those animals also be free range? So why would free range be more a genuine experience? Well, I suppose you have a point, Tony, because no matter where you are, if you venture far enough in any direction, you'll eventually hit some type of fence or barrier that animals can't cross. So the term free range has to be put into a context where the area that animals can freely roam is so big that hunting that whole area on a hunt is virtually impossible. Think the Sierra Nevadas or northern Zimbabwe or something like that. To put it in perspective, even the biggest high fence ranches in Texas or South Africa can be covered from fence line to fence line in one day of hunting. So they're nowhere near to being free range hunts, no matter what anybody tells you. To your second question, why would free range hunting be a more genuine experience? Well, that's because the animals have a huge advantage over the hunter because they have the option of simply leaving the area you're hunting if they want to. On a high fence property, they don't really have that option. This is why high fenced hunts, no matter how large the property is, are almost always successful, and free range hunts, are often unsuccessful. And the next letter is from Paul in Southern California. Paul wrote, Hey dog, some great fortune on your African hunt. Now that you've taken your game, how do you handle the processing of your trophies? Do you get your mounts done there and shipped to you, or have the hide shipped home and get a local taxidermist to handle the mounts? Well, my trophies are going to be dipped and packed in Zimbabwe and shipped to the United States. My neighbor across the street from me owns the largest taxidermist studio in my county, and he's probably going to do most of the taxidermy. And I always use Coppersmith as my broker too, so you're going to need a broker to do that. So It's a pretty simple process for me. And our last letter is from Franz in Austria. Franz wrote, I completed your presentation on Europe and USA hunting. I love our traditions and ceremony, but I am jealous of your hunting and rifle ownership freedom. I wish there existed a combination of both. Yeah, I agree with you, Franz. That would be an ideal hunting culture, wouldn't it? A culture where you had the freedom to buy a rifle and a hunting license and hunt wherever you wanted on large areas of public land. But at the same time, all the hunters that did hunt gave thanks and respect to the animals and hunted with some kind of code of honor. Unfortunately, a culture of strictly enforced behavior usually eliminates freedom. And a culture of freedom usually eliminates some forced code of behavior. I think that a place like Sweden or Finland are probably the closest thing in the world to the environment you described, but they still lack most of the traditions that your country has. Well, that wraps up another edition of Hunt Camp Mail. Here's some memes for the month of September. As I stated in the prologue, if you have questions about my Africa trip that weren't answered yet, it's because I'm doing a special Africa Q&A video that I'll post soon. I received so many Africa related questions that even that video might not cover them all. You could reach me with any questions or comments at desertdogoutdoors@gmail.com. Be sure to support my channel by subscribing if you like my content. And as always, thank you for watching and good hunting.